Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 6. This is a chapter on consumer, industrial, and government market. So we're going to split things up in this chapter by, again, kind of narrowing down some of the areas for marketing internationally in three areas, as the title indicates. Here we are, the month of March 2020. And as I cover this chapter, I want to kind of remind you that there is definitely going to be a theme here for us as we look at these customers throughout the world. And this theme has to do with the current situation in the international economy. And so the coronavirus and the effect that it has had on markets and on trade is going to be highlighted as a direct effect of what has happened here to China as a main hub of distribution and the interconnectedness. What'll be interesting is in the future, as this video is seen by my other students, will be to keep track of how that has affected things in the long term and how things are moving. So let's get started. So we start with, again, I'm following your text over here and your slides. So I recommend that you have your text handy and then you follow it. We're starting on part 2 of the book. So chapter 6 is part 2, which is finding global customers. That's the second part of the book. On page 179 is where we are, consumers, industrial, and government market. There's a nice vignette here about Apple, and it lets us know about Apple targeting global customers. If you think about the iPhone, which I know we've talked about before, and how brilliant it has been for Apple to target the international client with the iPhone. For those of you who can still remember what phones looked like prior to the iPhone smartphone, they all had tiny little keyboards. Think about just that alone. As you're trying to target demographics outside the United States, you're going to have to adapt those keyboards to different languages, characters, etc. Because Apple is only relying on software and the hardware stays exactly the same internationally, it really is able to target a global customer without having to modify the product. So what do we know about Apple? The book tells us about 60% of Apple's sales fall outside the United States. I believe that the book is a little bit outdated here. It's an older version, and so by now we're about three quarters of all sales for Apple are outside the United States. Again, reminding everyone that although it is an American multinational corporation, it very much relies on the global consumer. All right, so here we are now on page 181 is where we have this graph here. And as you look at the individual levels, characteristics of the consumers, what surrounds that are the national level and supranational factors. So at the very heart of it, you have the consumer, right? What I did here is I kind of wanted to look at different factors of consumption throughout the world and how they're affected based on the individual level characteristics of the consumer. Some cultures are big on meat, right? And so what I did is I kind of wanted to show you this here, which is, which countries eat the most meat. This is February of 2019. So there's a little bit of a ranking here letting you know by region, right? For meat production, Asia now is one of the largest producers of meat in the world. And then Europe, and then you can see where North America, of course, we definitely are a large producer of of meat, but not compared to Asia. So that's the first thing you want to look at. And then as we keep going, who eats the most meat? Well, as you look at these countries, meat consumption, that's kilograms per person per year. So the darker the country, the most meat, right? And so you could see that the United States definitely were at the very top there, together with Argentina and a couple other countries here. Russia over here, China, definitely not the same level of meat consumption as we are, right? Australia, of course, another, again, the United States, Australia, and Argentina, very big meat consumers. And then lastly, meat consumption. What are the average annual consumption? So the United States still number one per person in the world. Again, number one per person. So 330 million Americans per 330 million Americans. Yes, we eat the most meat. As an aggregate, for sure, China's will be will be the biggest consumer of meat in the world with about 1.4 billion people as a net number. And then let's see. What kind of meat we eat? Of course, poultry is what the United States eat the most of, but pork and beef still there. You can see over the years, pork and beef on the decline, poultry has been increasing. So again, this I thought would be kind of something that a lot of people could relate to, meat consumption throughout the world. But again, kind of reminding you internationally what the relationship of trade is between the producers and the consumers, right? So that's for the international level characteristics of the consumer with meat consumption. Then we go to the national level. So technology, infrastructure, legal environment, culture, all of these things obviously at the national level are going to affect the global consumer. Technology and infrastructure. If there's a great infrastructure in the country, and people are able to rely on that for trade, great, then demand might be high. Policies, if the policies lend themselves well to trade and consumerism, great. Same with culture. I highlighted the economic environment, and I wanted to, in this particular case, highlight Japan, right? And so currently, on the micro level, Japan is on its way to a recession. This is from the Financial Times, and this is February 2020. And so Japan has been struggling, right? And it's been like that for a while. The prime interest rate of Japan for a while was negative, if not just above zero. And so Japan is in trouble. Now that's a very big deal because Japan is one of the top 3 economies on the planet. And so this, of course, can affect trade and consumerism. Japan is a key player in lots of different ways in terms of trade, right? And so when the GDP shrinks at 6.3% rate after consumption tax rise, that's a massive deal. So again, in this case, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting the Japanese GDP as a key part of the national level factor and how that's going to affect, of course, individual levels of the consumer for consumerism. And then we're getting into the outer layer, right? So this is the supranational factors, the factors outside the nation, right? What's happening outside. So globalization, of course, plays a huge role, information communication technologies, and trade, institution, and policy. I'll update you a little bit on the trade climate with this slide. I think we talked about it a little bit, but the author, when the book was published, very optimistic about trade integration and trade deals and things like that. As we've discussed, things have gone a different way, and the climate has been very interesting and changing a little bit. So we'll talk about how that affects trades, etc. So now, having said that, let's look at the world GDP, right? So first, let's see what we have here in terms of the world GDP. So this is through the International Monetary Fund, and kind of reminding you that you have, of course, the United States is $22 trillion, right around there, and then you have China at $15 trillion, and then look at that, Japan. So Japan is the 3rd leading economy on the planet right now, which is why I wanted to show you why it's a big deal that the Japanese economy is about to hit a recession. Now, as you look at this graph and you see the projection, right? You have different ways of looking at things, and right now we have 2020 right here, which is still projected. We don't have all the data since the year's not over. So if you want to look at 2019, here we are. It's kind of interesting to see at the very top the world economy, right? And then you have advanced economies and then emerging economies. We'll talk about emerging economies in just a little bit. And as you kind of look at these progression, and you go back to the beginning, right? And you look at what the world looked like not too long ago. Look how things have changed in terms of these economies, right? Uh, and so look at the U.S. economy, but more importantly, look at China over the years and how these economies are changing. And you could really see how things even here are projected, right? We have $20 trillion over here, 2024, and $25 trillion for the United States. That's optimistic by lots of accounts who predict China's GDP will be greater than that of the US. We'll see what happens, obviously. Japan here is still at 6, and then you have India. Some people predict actually India will surpass Japan. UK is at 3. You get the idea. So that's where we are here with the world GDP. Now, as we continue to look at what's going on, of course, there's been some updates, right? And so for the latest update, what we have here is, of course, this. The global economy could post its worst year since the financial crisis as coronavirus weighs on a slowing growth. And this is coming from Bank of America, February 27th, right? So this is really, again, a big deal because if things slow down globally, it's a compound effect between all these countries that trade on multiple levels. Now going to your author who had discussed, well, let's just go to the next slide and I'll talk about that a little bit. Again, just reminding you of what's at play here. The drivers, what drives the global consumer, right? So first there's this emergence of global consumer that coincides with two driving trends. The first one is globalization. So organization of life on a global scale. There's a consolidation of world society and growing interconnectedness of nation. We are truly interdependent. That's just the way it is. And so that's where we talk about this interconnectedness. And this is again where I was talking about your author discussing trade integration. What does that mean? The tendency of these countries to cut deals together and create trade deals. As you know, there's been some hiccups there. So what I have here for this update is this World Trade Organization has a fun little tool here that they call the Trade Barometer. So the barometer signals further weakening of trade in the first quarter 2020. So the below trend again, index value since December. And I mean, if you look at the history over here, right? 2011, and you can see some peaks, right? 17 and 18, and then right there, 2018, we are like at an all-time low for the goods trade barometer right here, and for the world merchandise trade volume. Again, this data is coming from the organization that tracks trade, the World Trade Organization. So things are definitely not looking the way they did when the book was published. This is the update. In conjunction to that, another article here from the WTO, which shows that trade restrictions by WTO members are at historically high level. Obviously, that's the very opposite of trade deals or trade integration. So that's also been alarming, which is why it's shown this barometer and how it's reducing trade, right? So the trade barriers are up is what I just showed you. Now, again, technological development in information and communication are further drivers to global consumer. Geographic distance leads to development in transportation, and there's this international mass media that plays a major role in the emergence of a global consumer. I indulge myself with this example with one of my favorite shows, Top Gear, that was a show on the BBC. Top Gear is fascinating, it broke records, right? So BBC's biggest global brand, it talks about an audience of 350 million in 214 territories. And on top of that, franchises that were made. So you had franchises, the Top Gear US, Top Gear China, Russia, France, South Korea, Australia. As just an example of, again, a franchise that's worked out really well there and transcends borders. Usually the example given also is, well, there's several, but Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was another one. There's many. The global consumer is an individual or an organizational buyer that exhibits similar needs and taste worldwide. So notice that we're talking about, it could be an organizational buyer as well, but they have similar needs and taste. So this is where we go between the concept of heterogeneous versus homogeneous markets that behave the same, right? The global market segments are groupings of consumers that exist in multiple countries and display similar characteristics. So what we have here again, people all over the world that behave in a similar way because they have similar needs. If you think about Hollywood and the movies that come out of Hollywood, there's global demand and in terms of sales for Hollywood, and it shows that some of these countries are interested in the same movie, and again showing that similar characteristics are displayed. There are signs of this global cosmopolitanism and modernity. If you think about it, what that means, it's just a person who is apt to want to be more global about requirements and demands, right? Look at Netflix. How many more foreign movies are showing up on Netflix, right? We had a Korean movie that won an Oscar recently. I mean, that's amazing. And so basically that's what that means. Air conditioners before were just, from very developed countries, and now it's kind of one of those, again, areas of modernity. Autos, cars, Tata Motors of India. Why India? Why does it matter? Again, over 1 billion people. And Tata Motors has really capitalized on the automobile in a country where once upon a time people still relied very, very heavily on scooters, etc. Of course, it's creating other problems, congestion, pollution, etc. Consumer electronics, hamburgers, McDonald's. It's fascinating. There's this whole Bergonomics thing about developed countries and developing countries and tracking the economy of a country by how many McDonald's they have. Firms cut costs by minimizing the variety of parts. I don't want to get into too much detail. For those of you who took global business already, this is where we talk about the concept of, first we talk about economies of scales. We know what scalability is. And then we add to scalability international economies of scales. But then we had another concept called economies of scopes. And economies of scope has to do with minimizing the variety of part from key suppliers. So what we have here, as some examples are manufacturers that want to reduce those parts. This is from Dell, and your author actually talks about this. So I decided to, whenever I can, I try to keep everything aligned with the author and the text. But some interesting little factoids here about Dell. And so in terms of manufacturing, you find out that, where Dell makes computers, and first as a company, right? Dell is one of the world leaders. Now I've surpassed HP Compaq for, servers, etc. And so kind of giving you an idea there who the players are. Business, government, and education, and consumers. Why I thought I would show you this is because, again, look at our chapter. We're talking about the types of consumers, and in this case, I wanted to show you, again, 80% of their consumers are businesses and institutions, and that's what keeps them afloat, right? Chaffey College almost exclusively has a Dell product. And then service and support throughout the world. What's fascinating is the manufacturing locations. Forget subsidiaries and distributors. Look at the manufacturing location, right? North America, South America, you got over here Ireland, Western Europe, you got China. So it's for a company like Dell, this is not a lot in terms of manufacturing. They've really consolidated manufacturing. And Dell Direct, of course, is their claim to fame. That's what made Dell. So anyway, you get the idea there in terms of variety of parts by minimizing locations. Same with components, right? Again, the coronavirus has really put a huge monkey wrench into this whole thing because it's affected all of this the channels, right? The distribution channels throughout the world have been affected by virtue of Asia being a central hub. You heard about now some contamination of the virus in Korea. Korea is a massive producer and supplier of multiple components, auto, but also mostly electronics, etc. And so we're seeing firsthand right now the direct interconnectedness at play because of the virus. Other inputs used to produce finished products and services. The supply chain issue looms as Foxconn halts production in China. So again, what I'm doing is I'm keeping it current based on what we're following along with your author, and it's I guess a depressing way of looking at the current infrastructure interconnectedness, but it's very real. And when you look at the names over here, so Foxconn, most of you, when you look at your product, your electronics, yes, it comes from Foxconn, right? And this, let's see what we have a date here, February 4th, Foxconn stopped production in most of its factories. So if you look at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, all these guys, and more, by the way, your Xbox, Kindle, PlayStation, iPhones, your Apple laptops, all of the stuff comes from Foxconn. And so there's going to be a ripple effect there in terms of cost, in terms of supply chain distribution, etc. So let's see. The global consumer continued. In business-to-business markets, global consumers seek to centralize and standardize purchasing, which makes a lot of sense, right? You want to minimize cost, and the way you're going to minimize cost, one of the main ways you're going to minimize cost is by reducing duplication of effort and increasing your scalability. And you increase your scalability, you increase your flexibility. By virtue of doing this, demand goes up, cost goes down, quality goes up because you become a specialist. I hope I didn't confuse anybody, but that's the essence of continuous improvement at play. So your raw materials, your parts, your components, finished goods, all of these things, you're going to try to keep them centralized. There is a consumer culture characterized by the emphasis on marketing-based exchange relationship. A large proportion of the population achieving improved standard of living, which means that, again, that consumer culture is exhibited in many countries where people are starting a little bit more money, the disposable income goes up, and the marginal propensity to consume also increases, right? Perception of consumption, even if it's not real, there's a perception, and there's a level and quality of consumption in those countries. There's an emergence of global consumers that facilitates companies' ability to target buyers worldwide with very similar products and services. I gave you the example of the Apple iPhone earlier. There's a million examples we could use there, right? So the influence on the global consumer, right? Again, all of these are going to affect the global consumer, their level of technology, and that's going to create more demand. Of course, economic status. Notice economic status sometimes is real or it's perceived, and the perceived economic status is one where we'll talk about that a little bit, where sometimes just showing that you're wearing the right brands, etc., is going to play into that. You're a situational factor, social factor that plays into the economic status, the culture. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about all that stuff. Let's see. So the economic status, the ability to purchase goods and services influenced by income level, and that relates to occupation. Technology, the level and usage of tools, machine, and techniques. What your author does here, he kind of reminds us about the fact that the majority of the global population makes less than $13,000. In fact, for those of you who took global business, you remember the the pyramid that we had showing, I believe, something like $2 trillion or $3 trillion. Sorry, I'm going from memory. Makes less than $2,000 a year. Most people on the planet make less than $20,000 a year. If I remember correctly, we have about a billion people making more than that. Strongly influenced by the nature of education system in individual countries. The personal motive, an internal force that orients a person's activities towards satisfying a need or achieving a goal. For those of you who remember, I mean, this class is international marketing, and of course there's going to be product offering that's going to satisfy a need or a want, right? Sometimes the same product can meet one or the other depending on your target market. So your basic need is one that will be, one of the ones that you can go after. So here what we do is we kind of recap a little bit on Maslow's need hierarchy. And so hopefully you're following along. We're on page 187. And, the author is reminding us that, of course, in marketing, the Maslow's need hierarchy is a tool that is still very central to marketing. And again, if you think about it, it's the difference between needs and wants, right? We need water to hydrate. Thank you very much. And so for me, the water works. It met that need. I hydrated, but wait, I want kombucha. And so I'll spend $4 on a little bottle of kombucha because it, in this case, this want satisfies a need, right? And so here, what we're finding out is that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for those of you who remember it, you're supposed to meet the physiological need at the very bottom, right? And so this is, survival, food, water, sleep, etc. And then we're getting into safety, shelter, love and belonging, esteem, self-actualization. What's fascinating is that, of course, you're supposed to meet the requirement of physiological before you jump over to safety. Once you've met that, then you can jump over to love and belonging. And if you look at esteem, same thing. Well, what the author is reminding us is that those rules, of course, don't apply to all. When you have someone who barely meets the physiological need, but is going to splurge on an iPhone or a phone, and it's, of course, they're skipping a bunch of stuff, but that's what they're doing. And so, of course, marketers are going to capitalize on that if it gives them an edge in their market share. And this is when we talk about ethics later on and social responsibility. And by the way, circling back to that, I have an assignment that I think you will enjoy, which is about corporate social responsibility and ethics, and it highlights kind of a shift with cigarette manufacturers realizing they're losing market share in developed countries, namely in the United States, and really refocusing their strategy in less developed countries and in developing countries. Of course, knowing what the product does, etc., but having very deliberate strategies to increase market share. So it's an assignment that's sobering in different ways, especially when you toward the end of the assignment you link up to the World Health Organization article that I have for you that talks about that strategy. All right, so influence on the global consumer, the hierarchy of need is relevant to international marketing. Need level vary worldwide as a function of economic status, technology level, and other factors, right? Again, everybody's going to have different needs. Worldwide, people do not consistently follow the Maslow's hierarchy of need, which is what I exemplified right there with the little iPhone. Culture is an integrated system of learned behavior patterns that distinguish members of a society. Culture is characterized by norms, which are accepted behavior within a society or a group. And I know this is where in the culture chapter of Global Business, for example, we talk a lot about culture, the differences, kiss, bow, shake hands, how to do business in 60 countries. We've talked, I think, a lot about culture and differences so far. What the social factors are, family, social groups, influence on consumer behavior, they will affect that. Here we have the influence of the global consumer going into situational factors, right? So here we have the environmental or location condition that affect how consumers behave. I kind of piggybacked on the author's example here, which is about Thailand, right? Showing you the physical surrounding include geographical location and climate. The rainy season in Thailand is June through October. This is a picture of the rainy season in Thailand. And look at the GDP growth, right, in Thailand per quarter, right? And every drop that you see every year has to do with the economy crawling to a halt because of the monsoon season, right? This is true of Thailand. This is true of many South Asia Pacific countries that also have the same problem with the monsoon, right? The institutional environment, public organizations, and constraints that societies create to give structure to human interaction. We could go many different directions there. The author talks about Greece and how for a while the government of Greece set the time where businesses were allowed to open and close. So I don't know if this is still current, but per the author, businesses in Greece could not stay open past a certain time. I think it was 9 p.m. So those would be examples of that. COO, country of origin. And so this is another one that piggybacks on the global business class. Nation where a product is produced or branded. So the made in, right? Made in. I remember this one group in my global business class that did a presentation on Spain. And one of the very industrious group members decided to reach out to the either the consulate, I believe it was the consulate of Spain, but don't quote me on that, in LA. I say consulate, or I'm thinking embassy, but I want to say it's probably consulate. Anyway, they were able to have an audience with the consulate. So the group drove to LA a few times, had a really great reception, and they were talking about the project, asking different questions. It was fascinating because some of the stuff that the group came up with definitely is not the kind of mainstream information that we would get. Had to do with Levi's. And so Levi's jeans are popular in Europe, they're popular in Spain. And what Levi's had decided to do a while ago is to make their jeans in Spain. To differentiate them from American-made jeans, what they had done at the time was the little red tab in the back was of a slightly different color. The American tab was red and the Spanish tab was orange. Well, that backfired because Spaniards refused to buy the made in Spain jeans because they were less authentic, less American, and they really wanted the made in America Levi's jean at the time. All that to say that the CO is a big deal if you think about where your product comes from, right? Bioreaction to CO are influenced by various factors. There are stereotypes, right? And they vary depending on the origin of the judge, the person judging, and on the category of the product being judged by this consumer, right? And so here I have for you, a little story here from USA Today, reminding us that Japan's Toyota has the most made in the USA car, the Camry. A lot of people think of the Camry as, Japanese car. It's fascinating, right? Because the Camry, that's the Camry right there, is an American-made car. Again, if I want to show you the factory, hopefully these. By the way, when you have access to these PowerPoint slides, I have lots of hyperlinks for those of you who are interested in this later on. But the Camry, one of the best-selling American cars, is made in Kentucky, along with the Lexus ES350, Toyota Avalon, Camry, Avalon Hybrid, and so these are all cars here made in the United States, made in Kentucky. I know a lot of people, even Lexus, would not have thought that, right? And then, of course, you have this ad here for The Chevy Silverado, right? Our country, our truck, it states. So let's click here and kind of learn a little bit more about the Chevy Silverado and find out what's going on there in terms of COO, country of origin for the Silverado. And what you find out is that you have right here, let's see, yep, sorry about that. Did not work. Ah, no. Well, I apologize, but I had a link previously, it just didn't transfer over, showing you that the Chevy Silverado, let's just look it up right now. Chevy Silverado is made in Mexico. And I can't remember the name of the plant, my apologies. There we go. Here it says partially made in Mexico. It depends which one you're looking at. You have to look at your VIN number and which one you have specifically. But there it's no, that's not the one. Anyway, there's a plant in Mexico that makes most of these Silverados. Again, the opinion varies depending on the national origin of the firm and the location where the product is actually made. What does that mean? You know, the Made in Japan has a brand. It has a history to it. For not too long ago, cars made in Korea, in the 80s were not really the reputation wasn't so great in terms of reliability. Now they're up to par with Japanese cars. So the effect, as the capacity of countries to perform well in industry improves, CO phenomena varies over time. There's a tendency of consumers to discriminate against foreign product, and it varies by demographic factors. There's this concept called consumer ethnocentrism. It's a tendency to view domestically produced goods as superior to those made in other countries. And again, different countries are going to have different one. In global, we had talked about the liability of foreignness. We talk about election cycles. This year, we're in the middle of an election cycle. What does that mean? As we get closer to the nominations and the debates, between the two parties, you're going to hear a lot of bringing back jobs to the United States and American jobs, etc., which is fantastic. But the problem for a company like Toyota is what does that mean, and how does it affect the company? And so around election cycles, what Toyota will do is it'll pay a lot of money for these types of ads that should play, apologies. And what this ad shows you is it reminds you how many Americans work at Toyota plants in the United States.
At Toyota, we're investing all over America, including here. And we're not slowing down anytime soon, with new plants and new jobs in the heart of the U.S. So more Americans will be able to say, we are Toyota USA.
All right. World-mindedness is basically the opposite of what we have just described. Consumers' interest in and openness to acquiring goods from other countries, right? The cosmopolitan is someone who maintains a network of links and personal contacts with those outside the immediate community. It's someone who is willing to venture into other cultures. I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with this. Hopefully this one works. It's the ultimate cosmopolitan person. You guys probably, maybe some of you remember who that is. He was the gentleman who was known as the most interesting man. This was the last ad that Dos Equis did to kind of say goodbye to this character that really was pretty iconic for the campaign.
Get a last look at this brave pioneer who will not be returning.
He is the most interesting man in the world.
His trip to Mars is only one way. Adios, amigo. Stay thirsty, my friend.
There we go. So you probably maybe remember some of those ads. It's a goofy example of the cosmopolitan, the ultimate one, right? Transcends culture, etc. All right, now we're switching over to the industrial buyer. Again, we shifting over. We had discussed the buyer, the international buyer, as a consumer in retail, and now we're shifting over to the industrial buyer. I will highlight some example of not just Boeing, but this product here, which is the Boeing Dreamliner. And so in this case, Boeing or the industrial buyer purchases raw material, they purchase parts, components, supplies in order to produce other products, right? If you're going to make an airplane, you have to buy the motors, etc., etc. So buying is performed by professional purchasing managers who may buy enormous quantities of goods. Not only that, but of course, Boeing is a multinational American corporation, so you're buying from all over the planet. There's an example of that Boeing Dreamliner in terms of sourcing. So who just kind of think and maybe appreciate the magnitude of what it takes to build this airplane, right? You have all of the companies involved here, and you have the parts, and in this particular case, country of origin. Look at all of the international sourcing for Boeing, right? You have, again, Japan, Korea, American companies involved, an Italian company over here. It's really incredible to see what it takes to, and by the way, these are the big components. We're not even getting into all of the electronic components, what's inside the plane, right? So you're getting that into, so that's again, to kind of exemplify that, the derived demand, the demand for raw material or parts and other imports that depend on demand for some other goods. Well, think about what's happening right now. There are airlines who are going to, maybe they were thinking about ordering some airplanes. Right now they're holding off, right? The coronavirus, the global economy is starting to slow down. All these indicators are coming out. And so what does that mean for Boeing? Of course, Boeing maybe is starting to decide we're not going to start sourcing the way we were thinking about sourcing. So, it's going to affect General Electric. They're not going to sell as many motors to Boeing, etc. All right, the influences on the global industrial buyer. Culture plays a role. Again, influences occur at the level of the nation, the industry, and the firm. Industrial buyers vary based on their attitude toward risk, which differs cross-nationally. And this is where we'll talk a little bit about Gert Hofstede. If you guys remember, we talked about him before in terms of culture and how to measure and compare cultures from different countries. And one of the key indices that he had was uncertainty avoidance. This is all from chapter 3. And he reminds us, we're reminded here that countries that rank high on uncertainty avoidance are risk averse. So they will follow the rules, the regulations, the control mechanism to minimize risk. The countries that have low uncertainty avoidance are innovative and open to new approaches. The industrial buying process is very systematic. It's very sequential. Professionals they identify first the need. They meet in committees. It's a lengthy process. They evaluate, and then they choose among brands and suppliers. So what I have here for you is Boeing suppliers. If you wanted to sell to Boeing, well, Boeing has obviously its own website to let people know, okay, they're always welcome, partners to come into the company and for their product in terms of what they buy, right? So aerospace support, avionics, lots of stuff, what their expectations are as a consumer, the procurement. So procurement is the fancy word for purchasing, right? and then you can register your company if you want to do business with them, etc. Right? So that's the process there. What purchasing will do is they'll select the most appropriate supplier, they'll place an order, and they review the performance of supplier and its goods. Without getting into too much detail, when you guys take operations management and you learn a little bit more about operations management, this is when we talk about more supply chain and sourcing, etc. And once you dig a little bit deeper and you go into operations management and quality, this is where you can see that sometimes the process is a little bit flawed. And what I mean by that is organizations have a tendency to want to go with the lowest cost. And the problem is, if I'm making a car and every 3 years I go out to bid for transmission, and I have 6 companies that sell these transmissions, and I use the same company for, let's say, 6 years in a row. And now I have another company that's telling me they can sell me a transmission cheaper. If you think about what that's going to entail, it will entail a level of risk in terms of reliability. And what happens is I have to decide if I'm willing to save money on the transmission in terms of cost, if it means that it will cost me money in the long term with recalls or with decreased reliability of this transmission. So there are some flaws in this purchasing. Here's an example here that's closer to home. This is a hyperlink to Chaffey College and our own purchasing department to kind of let you see that this is not just about multinationals like Boeing, but our organizations here, little old Chaffey College. When you look at this is the purchasing service webpage, and it kind of reminds you of some of their notice to inviting interested contractors, etc. But look at the bids over here. So a bid or an RFP, right, a request for proposal, sometimes it's called an RFQ, a request for a quote. So we need X-ray tables and simultaneous X-ray tube equipment. And so notice calling for bids. What are the bid documents? Outdoor furniture seating beneath shade. So, these are all things that currently Chaffey is looking at. HVAC replacement, we have a bunch of projects, right? We invite people to compete, notice for bids. So then this is where we have a document that lets them know for these X-ray tables and X-ray tube equipment, what the specifications are, and where to direct their attention if they want to submit their bids, what the deadlines are, etc., etc. Let's see, influences on the global industrial buyer. So what we have here is, again, I wanted to kind of give you some updates, right? So first, the stages of the economic development of these countries, right? And so this is now on page 194. And you have the traditional society, which basically is a society where people just survive based on farming. Really, out of the 200 countries, not too many of those left. At least most of the very poor countries will be in the transitional stage where they've evolved a little bit beyond agriculture and engage in some simple manufacturing, right? So that's transitional. And then once they've gotten that down with the simple manufacturing and improved that, they go into the takeoff mode, which is now maybe they've specialized in mass-produced goods and they trade those goods. Next stage is the drive to maturity, production of high-tech products, and then finally the mass consumption, which is thriving consumer and individual economies with large service sectors, and that's true of the many advanced economies. This is from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and what it is, it's a little blurb about a predictor of the world in 2050. And it's letting you know what the predictions are in the global economy by this multinational consulting think tank. I'll let you hear it out. Pay attention specifically to what you hear about Vietnam.
What will the world economy look like in 2050? Here's our 60-second update. update on the long-term outlook for global growth. We expect China to be the dominant world economy, with India challenging the US for second place. Indonesia could be up to fourth place, Brazil fifth, with 6 of the largest 8 economies being emerging markets by 2050. UK could be down to 10th place, France out of the top 10, Italy out of the top 20, as it is overtaken by high-growth economies like Vietnam. The rise of emerging markets will pose both opportunities and challenges for business. To find out more, visit our website to read our latest World in 2050 report.
There we go. For those of you who are interested, so it's interesting. Again, it's these are predictors based on data, trade, etc. So influences again on the global industrial buyer. National situation factors also play a factor. Technology acceptance model describes how individual and firms accept and use given technologies. Not all countries are going to rank the same way in terms of use of technology. There's again different ways of looking at this. Some countries have traditionally ranked pretty high. Some are growing. This is an article from Harvard Business Review, and it's using data from, well, I'll just kind of show you. So we're ranking countries by tech, by data, and by business skills, right? And, by the way, McKinsey is the biggest consulting firm in the world, suggests that globally more than 50% of the workforce is at risk of losing their jobs to automation. And so, they talk about that. And again, this is where the global skill set and technology plays a role. Coursera is a really interesting website. You could take free courses there. And free courses taught by leading universities throughout the world, by the way. And what they do is they track, again, so Coursera is the world's largest platform for higher ed and brings 40 million learners around the world with over 3,000 courses from leading universities. So Coursera has analyzed who's taking what classes from what country and came up with a global skills index based on the data it has gathered. And it's really interesting. Number 1 in business, they say, is Finland. Again, this is from Coursera. Argentina is who they say ranks number 1 for technology. So if I go to technology over here and I look at cutting edge, these are the countries that they're saying are ranking as cutting edge. Then they have emerging countries and the lagging countries and the competitive countries. And so again, it's kind of giving you some ideas to where this is going. And this is, again, internal data of Coursera. This is from an article from Harvard Business that was published May 2019. It's not what you usually will hear in terms of technology. There's lots of other ways of looking at adoption of technology. See if I can do this quickly enough. And if I go to the CIA World Factbook by, as an example, and I can start looking at guide to country profiles over here, and let's pick a country over here. Let's look at, let's see here. Oops. Some countries are going to be under S for South, others not so much. Let's see. So here we go. South Korea. So as I look at South Korea, I can start looking at different indices, right? And so in this particular case, let's see what we have for technology. There we go. Excellent domestic international services featuring rapid incorporation of new technologies. Ranks first out of 34 Asian telecom. Exceedingly high mobile broadband penetration, very high fixed broadband. So again, what's fascinating when you look at South Korea for the telephone system and for broadband, South Korea is at the cutting edge. when you look at the percentage of the population in South Korea, this is from 2016, that uses internet, it's 90%. 99 out of 10 people in South Korea, have access to the internet. And in terms of broadband, again, kind of showing you subscription per 100 for broadband is 41. They rank 9 in the world when it comes to internet users, right? And again, so it's just really some sobering, interesting ways of looking at technology. Now that we looked at South Korea and where the country ranks in terms of technology and especially what we just discussed with the internet, let's see what we have as a comparison for the United States, right? There we go. And so in the United States, 76% of the population uses the internet. And again, I did this deliberately to show you country comparison to the world. We rank number 2 for subscriptions in the world, so 34 out of 100. And as a net number, we have 110. But in terms of comparison to the world over here as a percentage, we're number 3. Remember, Korea was number 2. Anyway, again, those things are going to matter as you want to penetrate a market. The exchange rate fluctuate, and they affect the attractiveness of foreign goods, making them costly and inexpensive. The Economist magazine, and by the way, we're talking about 2 things. Sorry, let me go back. We're talking about, in this case, inflation and exchange rates, right? So remember that when we're looking at exchange rates, there's currency exchange rate, that's one thing. But if you start to look at cost of living adjustment, inflation, etc., it becomes a little bit more interesting, a little bit more complicated, finally. So this is the Big Mac Index, and it's a comparison tool that benchmarks other currencies to the US dollar. And if you look at the entire world, there are 2 countries that have a currency that ranks stronger than the dollar at purchasing power parity, the PPP. The Swiss franc is overvalued by 20%, and then the Norwegian krone is also overvalued. And then you start to look at the other currencies. There we go. Norway's by 5.3. We're the benchmark currency, and the South African rand is going to look at like it's ranking toward the bottom over here. Is negative 62%. It's undervalued by 62%. So these are things that you would take into account as you start to talk about trade. Remember that if you have a strong currency, it's going to hurt your exports. If you have a weak currency, it's going to help your exports. And then finally, inflation. A lot of people forget what inflation does. So in this case, I'm just using a domestic inflation calculator as an example. So let's say you talk to your parents and you ask your parents, let's pretend that you got hired where you work now a while ago, and when you got hired there, they were paying you $30,000, right? And you were hired back in let's say 1990. So if you were hired in 1990 and they paid you $30,000 and you never got a pay raise except for just cost of living, that's it. And sometimes about 2% a year. What is $30,000 in 1990 money, in today's money? That's $60,000. So again, if today that same person is getting $60,000, they might think, oh look, I'm so lucky. I've been there for 30 years, and they're so generous. They're paying me $60,000. That literally means you never got a pay raise. You get paid the same as you did when you first started. All right, so that's a kind of a way of looking at what inflation does. Again, I use domestic calculator. There's different ways of looking at inflation. You could look at inflation calculator by state if you're thinking about moving out of state. You can look at, of course, by country. The government buyer. Again, that the government buyer is a big deal. If you think about the biggest customer on the planet, well, we'll talk about, in fact, think about it now. Who do you think the biggest customer on the planet is? And biggest by that, I mean with the biggest, checkbook. Governments are important targets for sales of goods and services, and the aim of competitive bidding ensures that the government pays a competitive price, and they receive quality of goods, and also it's to avoid corruption. So in this particular case, what I did is I wanted to take you straight to usaspending.gov, which tracks how much we spent last year as a country. Last year, the United States spent, I think if I remember well, $4 trillion. Let's see here. Apologies, people, my computer. There we go. $4.5 trillion in 2019. That's how much the federal government of the United States spent. That's not the state of California. That's the federal government of the United States, spent. So what is $4.5 trillion? Well, if we were to look at GDP per, at PPP, in terms of world ranking, let's see what that would mean. $4.5 trillion. I think I'm due for a new computer, people. I apologize. Let's see. There we go. Finally. So what do we have? This is from the World Bank. These are our indicators for our GDP. And what we have here, there we go. Let's go by value. So 4.5 would put the entire expenditure in 1 year of the United States is as much as the GDP of Germany in 2018. In fact, it's more than that. It would place the US just only, we're talking about how much money the US federal government spent last year is enough to put that number as the fourth largest economy on the planet. And by the way, it's more money than the entire GDP of Germany in 2018. Again, I think these comparisons are important because they put things in perspective. Selling to the government can be very bureaucratic. When I worked in the computer industry, that's what I did. I sold computers and different solutions to the government. My main client in Sacramento was the U.S. Department of Justice, and the two contracts that I worked with was the GSA contract, which is a federal contract, and the CMAS, which is a state contract. It's a lot of work. There's lots of rules and regulations, and the specs, that the things you have to go through are really numerous. But again, because it's worth the hassle if you're willing to work hard, because as you just saw, the government very much has the money. So there's an agreement on government procurement internationally, right? So if you think about, all countries have different standards, right? And so what the World Trade Organizations ended up doing, not too long ago, by the way, is come up with ratification of procurement internationally. And so for the countries that have agreed to sign to this procurement agreement internationally, now they have basically agreed that they would have the same kind of, follow the same rules. So here are some of the countries involved, right? Notice again, 94 is not that long ago. Some revised their GPA, it's called, by the way, the agreement on government procurement. And so these are the countries that have ratified the agreement. The United States, we entered into this agreement in 96 and revised it in 2014. So we are now part of that. Marketing to the global consumer. Well, here I have a couple of things here. When you think about what these three symbols, we all know that's Apple. We of course know it's an American multinational, but that symbol is really just marketed all over the world now. Jarritos, right? Jarritos, not too long ago, once upon a time, really was not readily available in the United States, and now it is. It's everywhere. Sushi, again, not that long ago, Americans really were not eating that much sushi, and now it's a staple for many, many Americans. So when you think about marketing to global consumers, the global market segment is a group of customers who share common characteristics across national markets. The international firm aims for a global positioning strategy is the one in which the offering is positioned similarly in the minds of buyers. And so these brands are going to often try to position themselves, and again, I'm just using examples. I know sushi is not a brand, but are going to be positioned similarly in the mind of buyers. Firms organize dealings with key global account management. They're called GAM. And I have another hyperlink that I'll skip for now from Harvard Business about managing global account and the significance of that. They benefit customers because you can, if with that account, you can source procurement from all over the world. I mean, think about how complex it would be to source product for Boeing, right? It ensures the suppliers speak to the customer one voice, reducing miscommunication. Customer needs to deal only with a single contact point, a global account executive who provides consistent support. The country of origin challenges, the COO we talked about earlier, right? When contemplating a new marketing venture, management should conduct market research to learn the nature of the COO. Is your country of origin going to be welcomed there? Is there a perception bias? I use this as an example here, as a luxury car. I mean, look at this. Not that long ago, people thought they would have never been able to guess that this is the inside of a Hyundai, right? This is the Hyundai, the G90 Equus. And so, in this case, how can you overcome negative stereotype because of your liability of foreignness, or perhaps your brand, there's some stodgy, old, maybe bias towards some of your brand as a product. Well, how do you overcome that? By offering superior quality product. And again, I use the example of Hyundai because they've really just unbelievable what they've done in terms of reliability and quality over the years, and their product offering. Offer the product at a low price is another way to do it. Distributes the product through a well-respected intermediary. If you have a third-party middleman that's respected, it could be a store, an outlet, etc., that people go to, that might work. The focus of marketing is the customer. Relationship marketing, for those of you who took marketing, you're familiar with that. Relationship marketing is a very big deal. In my class, we use Starbucks as an example of a retail example of that, when the baristas are trying to learn your name and memorize it. Achieved by emphasizing activities that ensure consistent customer satisfaction, acquire quality relations with supply chain partners and collaborative venture partners. So it's very difficult to maintain those relationships, which is why you need the CRM, a customer relationship management. Those are used nationally, and there are CRMs that are used internationally, where you analyze data to develop, maintain two-way relations between the firm and the key customer. Just think about it. Internationally, people are going to want to do business in different ways, using different mediums, etc. The goal is to maximize the value to the firm's most important customers. SAP is a German firm that is one of the leaders in the world with CRM, if you're interested in looking that up. Customer service include activities such as training, repair of damaged product, finance to assist customers in purchasing the product, complaint resolution. Again, going back to selling to government. Infrastructure development is one of the most lucrative market opportunities. I know we talked about that in this class, and if you think about when we spoke about that, ask yourself, at what point in this class did we talk about a big infrastructure development in the world, right? And, so again, nations need infrastructure and communication system to function well and develop economies. And the government procurement is the purchasing of product and services on behalf of government agency that helps with this infrastructure development. Tendering involves government desire to purchase a given product. Companies bid on the right to provide the product at a determined price. They choose the lower bidder. Again, what are the factors in ensuring that when you sell to the government, know the strengths and the weaknesses. The right resources should be developed with the appropriate relationship. Engage in planning, don't just leave it out. And, again, I asked you a question earlier about development and the cost of infrastructure development and the opportunities. We saw that the U.S. government spent $4.5 trillion in 1 year on its own budget. And by the way, that's for everything. That's not just infrastructure. So what I have here is from the OECD, and it's a document on China's Belt and Road Initiative, tracking investment and finance landscape for the initiative. And this is, basically the question is, would you want to be involved? Would you want to be the recipient of that money as a country, knowing that China is really spending a lot of time and effort doing that? And so what we have here is based on the annual investment needs is $2.9 trillion and $6.3 trillion. Again, this is an annual investment need for the development. Different groups have come up with different types of forecasts in terms of how much money China needs to keep its infrastructure investment going with the Road and Belt Initiative. I'm giving you an update. Obviously, this is not in the book, but something to consider as we talk about, further development in infrastructure throughout the world. All right. Well, I hope that wraps it up for now. I again will have the assignment on posted to the website, which will be the last assignment of the chapter, and this is the one on ethics and smoking. This is page 203, marketing tobacco and alcohol to consumers in developed economies. So again, I'll see you guys on the next time for chapter 7.